we went into lockdown. And moments after that, students started communicating with their parents, texting them, calling them from their cell phones. And as a result, as our first responders were arriving to the school, we have parents lined up in our driveway, and the first responders literally couldn't get to their vehicles to our school. The driveway was backed up all the way to the street. The building was in a lockdown, so I couldn't get in as superintendent. I'm on the outside, and I'm looking around and seeing our first responders cannot get in the building because students are contacting their parents, or parents are rushing to the school, creating a parking jam in our front driveway.
Hello, I'm Delaney Rustin, physician and the creator of the 4 Screenagers movies, and this is the Screenagers podcast. There are many of us who are looking at the data and believe that having phones and smartwatches put away for the full school day for all grades is what will serve our students best, socially, academically, and emotionally. And many states have passed or are in the process of passing laws calling for away for the day type policies, such as Indiana, California, Florida, and others. One big issue is how are phones going to be truly put away? Our Screenagers campaign, Away for the Day, is now calling for phones off students and locked away for the day, not kept in pockets on students, not in backpacks or regular school student lockers, but put in special phone cabinets or special boxes for the entire day. Or for schools that don't have that yet, there are locked phone pouches. One concern, though, is what about school emergencies, such as a person with a gun entering a school with intent to harm people? Would it be better for students to be able to have their phone, to be able to text or call parents? Early on in creating our Away for the Day campaign back in the end of 2017, we spoke with school safety officers who told us that it's much safer for students not to have access to phones in such situations for many reasons. In today's podcast, you're going to hear firsthand some of those reasons from people in the know, school leaders and police. Last month, I was traveling, giving talks and doing premieres with the new Screenagers film. And when I brought up Away for the Day, people wanted to talk with me. And this is how I got the 3 short interviews you will hear today. You'll also hear my interview with Clayton Cranford, a retired school safety resource officer who started Total Safety Solutions over 10 years ago, and through that has helped schools across the country with many safety issues. We do touch on the topic of emergency protocols related to when there's a dangerous person on school grounds. And I say this because I know this is a delicate topic, but that said, we do not talk about any upsetting details about school shootings or anything like that. Okay, let's get started. When giving a presentation in Indiana recently at a conference on youth mental health, I started talking with a police officer who is in administration and works closely with schools around safety incidents.
I do not like children having access to their phones directly in school because of the safety aspect of it. You can't get away from the information or the misinformation that gets presented. The slightest little rumor of a threat or the slightest statement that gets made that isn't investigated leaves the school quicker than the police even either get notification or school staff gets notification. And then we have to try to get ahead of what is going on with that. And it's very difficult to stop the rumor or to correct the information, making sure it is accurate with a timely response, but if we have to get ahead of those after the kids already have access to their phones, it's leaving the school faster than we even could get made aware of it.
So what's an example?
An example would be a general statement. I'm going to kill you because a play didn't go right in gym class. And now that gets translated telephone style into 6 different communications. And now with access to their phones, that's all getting home and then calling to dispatch. Even recently, we've experienced things like where we're investigating one incident or one potential threat, something else is being relayed that we weren't even aware of through social media, and it's leaving the school before our school resource officers were even aware that it occurred.
Had it occurred? Was it fake information or something?
Yes. The first threat was all just a basic potential statement that was found to not be credible, which then led to another outside investigation.
And what was the problem of it leaving school?
It started to cause kind of panic where parents were then getting information and calling dispatch. And then dispatch is now telling units that are out on patrol, which is being heard by other jurisdiction as well, which causes a police response that wasn't needed.
Right, and maybe was needed somewhere else and couldn't be there because this rumor. And what would you like to see for phones? Put fully away in locked areas during the whole school day?
Yes, I think it would be best that the kids did not have access to them to the full day.
And all grades?
All grades.
When I was doing a Chicago premiere this month of Screenagers Elementary School Age Edition, I spoke with an elementary school principal, and he shared with me what happened in his past job as a high school principal.
When I was a principal at a high school, we had a lockdown occur one time, and because all of the students got on their phones immediately, the network of the school crashed, and then none of our phones worked.
None of your phones worked?
Right, yeah. It kind of I don't know the correct term for it, but it short-circuited our Wi-Fi or whatever, and then everybody's phones just crashed and couldn't send any messages out. And that caused even more panic, with the parents, because then they weren't getting messages, things like that. So I am not a proponent of cell phones, especially during an emergency situation. So, yeah.
What was the event that had happened, or with the emergency?
A threat that ended up being unfounded, but then with things like that, we always, as they say, err on the side of caution, of course.
When recently I was working with students and parents in Connecticut, I spoke with a superintendent, and I want to share what he said. First, I want to make sure you know what the term swatting incident means. It refers to a hoax in which someone makes a false report to law enforcement, like claiming the person has a gun on campus or making a fake bomb threat to a school. Another thing to note is when I spoke to him, I mentioned a survey the organizers of the event shared with parents that the Screenagers team created that asked if they thought having phones makes students safer or less safe in an emergency. Let's hear from the superintendent.
We had a real-time, real-life emergency a couple of years ago. It was a swatting incident where it was a call into our dispatch that there was a shooter inside the school who was going to commit an act of violence. We went into lockdown, and moments after that, students started communicating with their parents, texting them, calling them from their cell phones. And as a result, as our first responders were arriving to the school, we have parents lined up in our driveway, and the first responders literally couldn't get to their vehicles to our school. The driveway was backed up all the way to the street, and first responders literally couldn't get into the building. The building was in a lockdown, so I couldn't get in as superintendent. I'm on the outside, and I'm looking around and seeing our first responders cannot get in the building because students are contacting their parents, or parents are rushing to the school, creating a parking jam in our front driveway.
The superintendent had brought up a police officer before I was recording, and I asked him to say why he had brought him up. You mentioned a safety expert. Can you say something about him?
Oh, we work closely. That was our chief of police, who has a background in safety and security, has a consulting agency on top of it. So he knows the work inside out, and he is very, very adamant that the last thing he wants kids doing during an emergency, a security emergency, is calling and texting their parents. One of the biggest arguments parents have is that kids should have access to phones, especially high school, during the day in the event of an emergency and a security breach. And we tell them, no, the first thing we want to have is first responders in the building as soon as possible. We got to speed up our responses to emergencies, not slow them down by having a traffic jam because parents are getting calls from their kids.
Yeah. And I think it'll be neat to pair what you just said with the survey we did, the parents anonymous survey. But I think what's telling about it is that I was quite happy elementary and middle school parents did know that silence is the recommendation, and therefore phones are not what's ideal in students' hands. But surprisingly, it was about 35% of the parents of high schoolers thought the opposite.
So play that number out. 1,800 high school kids, if 1/3 think it's okay, that's a lot of kids that are going to be contacting home still. Yeah.
Good point, right. And that is going to cause more mayhem, and a lot of parents live close to the school.
Sure.
That's what you saw. They got there quicker
They did.
than the responders. Now let's turn to Clayton Cranford, a retired school resource officer and founder of Total Safety Solutions. Clayton, thank you for being on the Screenagers podcast. Go ahead and introduce yourself if you would.
Sure. My name's Clayton Cranford. I am a retired sergeant from the Orange County Sheriff's Department in California. And I was in law enforcement for 20 years. I was a school resource officer in a city with 9 schools, and I was the only SRO.
I want to start by asking you a question. Students and schools and teachers have a drill by which they have learned what to do in a school emergency. And I would love you to talk about, is there a central clearinghouse that has come up with the guidelines, the protocol for that? Or is each school kind of making it up based on some, I don't know.
Yeah, there's no one clearinghouse for this at all.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I do is training schools, staff, all the adults at the school, like how do we respond to a critical incident at the school, including a school shooting? How do we prevent these things from happening by, looking for kids on the path of violence? So I'm like highly invested in this. Most of my law enforcement experience was dealing with this stuff. So no, unfortunately, no, there's not. There's kind of the industry best practices to these things. And a lot of smaller agencies may look to a larger agency or a state agency and say, hey, what are you guys endorsing? And so that's kind of what's happening. So every state, they have their own state agency and they have their own kind of protocols and so forth. So those schools have to adhere to whatever the state school safety agency, if they have one, what they say they should be doing.
So what are just best practices then? There's not a central standard, like a fire drill. We got certain instructions. So what are the main kind of big picture instructions that you would say most schools would be teaching?
So they have kind of a variation, something similar to a run, hide, fight. This is the most accepted practice and it works. So I can tell you from all my experiences in law enforcement and training people and then putting them in stressful situations to see how they do, we really kind of respond to the lowest level of training. So if you have zero training, that's where you're at. That's all you're going to do. You're not going to do anything. So we try to give some people some basic things. So run, hide, fight. In Orange County Sheriff's Department in California, we created something called deny, evade, engage, which is really kind of an educator-friendly way of looking at this. We went from a lockdown shelter-in-place model, and then after Sandy Hook, I think is probably that watershed moment where we went to something that was a little more dynamic. So we may be looking at evading or moving to another area or engaging in the worst case scenario, like you have to be able to defend yourself. You want to deny person access to victims because really,
like you'd block something or you deny them access.
You want to lock doors. You want to keep
Okay.
them away. And then stall because the amount of time it takes, as soon as law enforcement gets there, it's going to come to a resolution. So we just want less availability to victims and less time to do that.
Is part of that protocol silence?
Oh, absolutely. Well, one of the things is, silence your phones. The whole point of what they're doing is trying to injure or kill as many people as possible. And they also know that they have a limited time to do that. So they're really going to kind of move to the path of least resistance. They're not going to take time to get through a door if they think it's not worth their time and they're going to move on. So that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to lock down, you stay quiet, you don't make yourself available or a target.
I know the school shooter is the prototypical most feared thing. Is there anything else when we talk about school emergencies? Obviously, it could have a suicidal person in the school. You could have bomb threats beyond just a shooter.
An actual school shooter, so someone who is going there a la like, Columbine or something, where they're going there for a specific reason to kill as many people as possible. Those incidents, although one is too many, are very, very rare, even still. Like we have tens of millions of students in the United States, and between like 2000 and 2020, I think it is, or over a 21-year span, we had like 270 something casualties. So really what that means is that like 0.0006% of students could be a casualty in a school shooting incident, which is, it's obviously not zero. But when you look at the effects of giving your child a phone, especially at earlier ages, when you think this is keeping them safe, it's actually perhaps maybe doing the exact opposite. And clearly in a critical incident, we don't want kids on phones. We want kids to put their phones away. And what they need to be doing is like sharply focused on the adult who's there, who's supervising them and listening for what they should be doing next, and allowing them to text their parents, whatever, not going to make them more safe. In fact, it's going to make them on whole less safe.
Yeah. And that's ultimately what I want for us to talk about. One of the scenarios was a superintendent at a high school where there was basically an announcement or something circulated in that there was a potential shooter.
Mhm.
And what happened was it went through the cell phones of the students to the point that when the first responders arrived at the school, there was so many parents there that they couldn't enter the building.
Yes, that is a real issue because if you have all of the parents flooding to the school, and most schools have only one or two ways of getting in, like a street or something. If you pack those streets, because if parents drive, they get as far as they can, and maybe there's a car in front of them, they just get out and they start running. So they're leaving their vehicles in the street. Law enforcement, first responders can't get to the school. And at the end of the day, if a kid has a phone in the school, now hopefully schools are banning phones, but if a kid has a phone, they're going to be texting. Like that's going to happen.
And another one related just to rumors started happening on social media throughout the school, and police got called, and it got confusing because the resource officer there didn't even know what was going on. And then people were coming and things got out of control that way.
Yeah.
Do you want to speak to anything else about this?
Yeah. So I don't know what's going on, but I've had multiple school districts over the course of the last few weeks reaching out to me because they have a lot more threats coming in. And I can't quite explain why this is the case. I don't know if it's just kind of a contagion effect or we have just you hearing about it and kids are doing it. The bottom line is that if you're a parent or a student, what we recommend is if you learn of a threat or someone posts a threat or something, don't share that threat with like 20 of your friends at the school of other parents. Report it to the police or report it to the school site and then let them deal with it. If we are sharing this, you're just stoking fear. And my experiences as a threat assessor and now as a consultant, when someone directly threatens the school, like we get someone posting something on social media that's like very direct, I'm gonna blow up the school tomorrow or something like that. Those threats to me don't get my blood pressure up, like even a little, because the people who are actually going to do this, they don't do that. Like if they actually want to carry out an attack, the worst thing they could do is letting everybody know that they want to do it. When we hear information from a third party, like maybe another student who was talking to a kid online and this kid, leaked some thoughts about, maybe hurting someone or something to school, those kinds of things are much more concerning to me. And that kind of fits the progression of somebody in a path of violence is that when they start thinking and really perseverating about death and dying and homicidal ideas, it's difficult for them to not kind of share it kind of obliquely. They're not sharing it directly to the target or to law enforcement, but they're sharing these ideas that are concerning to other people. And what we want students to do, especially because they're going to be the first ones to see this, if you see something that is concerning to you, or maybe just kind of you see it and kind of it just makes you feel a little concerned, maybe you can't exactly say why, that's okay. Just share that with an adult, to an adult. Don't share with a bunch of your friends and let the adults figure it out.
What is your opinion and what you would want to see for cell phones and for high schoolers? What would you want to see the policy be?
I would like to see a policy where there's no phones allowed bell to bell, period.
And truly locked away.
Yes, truly locked away, put into lockers or some other kind of system where there's accountability that those kids can't access them. We speak to parents all over the United States and we address these kind of irrational fears that I think parents have, like my generation of parents, that their kid has to have a phone because they're going to be abducted by a stranger, or they have to have a phone because they're school shooters. We really kind of show like what's the chances of that actually happening compared to the negative outcomes that we have, especially mental health, or just the number of kids who are being sexually exploited through these sextortion scams right now. Very more likely your child's going to be a victim of that, thousands of times greater than ever being a victim of violent crime anywhere.
Yeah.
But especially school. School's still the safest place for a kid.
So when we look at this issue about phones in schools and safety issues, you and I agree completely to look at the whole picture of the impact, and that using that safety once and for all is not the right way to be thinking about it.
Yeah.
Well, Clayton, you can tell I wanted to talk about half as long, but I could talk to you forever because these are such important topics. All the work that you're doing, you're really level-headed. You're not being overly scare tactic or anything, but you just really want to be talking through this and getting all of us to be thinking about how we can talk about safety in a really non-judgmental, collaborative, open way with our kids and our students.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I'm a parent, so I understand. Like it's not easy. So we got to kind of work on this together for sure.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
As I wind down this episode, there's something important I want to add here, and that is if you've not already visited the Screenagers Away for the Day campaign, which you can find at the top of screenagersmovie.com, it'll link over to it. It's chock full of resources to help parents, educators, everyone involved in the school to help change policies to become Away for the Day. We're talking the latest data on things like why these policies help improve students' academic success and mental health. There's a toolkit for change, example policies and consequences for infringements, video testimonials, and most relevant to today's episode, there's a whole page with responses to common pushbacks, including the issue of school safety. I want to give a big thank you to my on-the-ground interviewees and to Clayton Cranford. And you can find more information about him at the episode page at screenagersmovie.com. If you liked today's episode, check out one we did called How Smartphones Are Pushing Schools to a Breaking Point. What a gift that you tuned into the show today. The Screenagers podcast and movement is all about learning together how we can best help our youth of all ages, our communities, and ourselves best navigate our rapidly changing digital world. Make sure to follow/subscribe to the podcast to get each episode automatically, and the more subscribers, the easier it is for others to find us. And if you give it a like and write a review, even just one sentence, that helps even more. Check out screenagersmovie.com to get resources for each episode and loads of other resources. Learn about our 4 Screenagers films, and find my weekly parenting blog, Tech Talk Tuesdays. And be sure to use the search bar to find many topics you might be wondering about among hundreds of my past blogs. Finally, I love hearing from you, so email me at Delaney@screenagersmovie.com. What ideas do you want to hear for future episodes? Today's show was produced by the following people: me, your host, Delaney Rustin, Lisa Tabb, Rebecca Tolan, and sound editing was done by Alan Gofinski.